Okay, good morning. So happy to be here with you all today. So thank you to the U.S. Embassy and to the English Language Teaching Center for allowing this opportunity to be with you here today. Okay, so we're talking about pedagogical practices today. There's three key topics that I'm going to be talking about. So formative assessment, differentiated instruction, and active breaks. Okay, those are the three main topics that we're going to be covering. So it's a lot of information, okay, but also what we're doing is not just about the content. So hopefully there are some new ideas that you gain, but also it's about the process. So it's about how things are being introduced. Okay, so as trainers of teachers, it's important to pay attention to the process, right? How we communicate our ideas. Okay, I'll give a little introduction of myself. So my name is Anna Dudzik, and I'm a U.S. English Language Fellow. So that's a program that's coordinated through the U.S. Embassy. Okay, and it's sponsored by the State Department of the United States. Okay, I have a master's degree in second language studies from the University of Hawaii. Okay, that's where I did graduate school. And then I worked within the system, the University of Hawaii system, for over 10 years, working at a branch called Kapiolani Community College, teaching primarily academic English, or English for academic purposes. Okay, so in that program, we used a content-based approach, integrated skills, and our primary focus was teaching English for academic purposes. Okay. So training and experience, of course, shape how we teach, right? They shape how we teach our classes, how we train other teachers. Okay, so that's a bit of my background. I've mostly worked with teaching adults, okay, but I have some experience as well, K through 12 in the US. Okay, and I've been part of teacher training programs in the US and abroad, okay, training other teachers. So currently I'm a US English Language Fellow working at UITM in Sabah. So I got there at the end of 2024 for an academic year, and I'm here during the current academic year. Okay, so through this semester. Okay, we'll go over objectives overall for the session. So these are the workshop objectives. So first, to expand understanding of pedagogical practices. Okay, these might be concepts that you're familiar with, right? Formative assessment, differentiated instruction. Okay, so the idea is that it's not all new information, but you can build upon it or gain some new insights into perhaps how to train in these topics. Okay. So expanding understanding. Second is to experience a variety of facilitation techniques and classroom activities. So this workshop is going to be very experiential. Okay, we're going to be doing a lot of different activities. These are activities that you would see in classrooms, activities that you can use as formative assessment, that you can use for differentiated instruction. Okay. And then finally, to adapt ideas. So the ideas from this workshop are not one size fits all, right? They have to be adapted to your context. So we'll think about how can you take ideas and activities that we discuss and experience today and adapt them so that they fit your context better. Okay. Can everyone hear me all right? Understand me all right? Okay. This is the basic structure that I'm going to be using. So we have 3 different sessions that we'll be following. Our first session will be on formative assessment. Second session is on differentiated instruction. And the third is going to be on active breaks. Okay. In that third session, we'll be doing active breaks as kind of the topic, but then we're also going to be applying a lot of the concepts that we've talked about today in a practical way. Okay. So for each section, I want to try to have opportunities to understand concepts or topics, experience new techniques and activities, reflect on these ideas that we're talking about and experiences that we're having, and then also apply these ideas. So adapt them to your context. Okay, so within each section, that's kind of the structure that I'm going to be using. Understand, experience, reflect, apply. Okay, we have various materials that we're going to be using. So you should have an individual folder that you were given in your bag, and that will have some handouts that we'll be using in the workshop today. Okay, so I'll refer to those when you need them. Okay, we're also going to be using Padlet. Are you familiar with Padlet? Okay, so we'll be using Padlet for sharing ideas. We don't have, with a larger group, we can share ideas all together like this, but that would also consume a lot of our time, okay? So we're going to share and extend the way that we can share through Padlet. And then it can also go outside of the actual parameters of time that we have face-to-face. Okay, so it's going to be kind of an extension of a community of practice. Okay, also Google Drive. So I've uploaded some handouts and materials in a Google Drive. I'll share that with you later. I'll also share my slides. So if you want to use information from my slides, if you want to actually use the slides for your own purposes, you can do that as well. Okay, you can adapt them and modify them. Okay, and then we also have a tabletop resource. So that will be introduced probably in session 3. Okay, so we have some physical resources that we'll be using. Okay, we're gonna start with a warm-up. So a warm-up activity. This is going to be very hands-on, right? So you're going to have to do these activities with me. So the activity procedure, this warm-up is called in common and not. You're going to be working with your table group members. Okay, so if we were in a room that had tables, where you would have table members, then you would do this as a group, right, as a table. Okay, we're gonna form our own kind of tables by who is around us. Okay, so we want to have about five people around you, and you'll be working with this group throughout the day. Okay, so I want you to sit so that you can communicate with them easily. So it means you're not just in a row, but probably in a little bit of a circle, right? So try to get so you have 5 people. Okay, it looks like we have our groups formed. So groups are anywhere between 4 to 6, it looks like. That's okay. Okay, so for this activity, sounds like we already have a lot of ideas to share. Okay, that's good, that's good. Okay, so for this first activity, let's listen up. You're going to be working with this group that you just formed, okay? Your task is to determine 5 things that you have in common as group members, okay? And then something that you have that's unique each. So 5 things, if you have 5 members, 5 things that you have in common, and then 5 things that are unique to each of you. Okay, so that would be 10 items that you're writing down. Write down your 10 items and then be prepared to share. So we'll have a group or two share what you came up with, okay? And if we were at tabletops, maybe randomly, I would use a spinner, okay, to select who's going to share. It seems like you all had a lot to share already. So I think with this group, we might not have any problem with volunteers. Okay, so do we have a group that would like to share what you found in common and what is unique? Yes.
Hello, good morning. So from our group, the 5 things that we found in common are, number 1, we are all IPG lecturers. Number 2, we are teaching English. Number 3, we are second language speakers. Number 4, we are teaching TESOL trainees. Number 5, we are all TESOL graduate. So it's revolved around TESOL. Actually, we have one extra, which is we all have taught for more than 10 years. Okay. So 5 unique things about us. Number 1, what is this? What did I write? What is it again, number 1? Oh my goodness. Okay, I'll just go with number 2. We are from we are different races: Kadazan, Chinese, Malay, Bajau. So different races and different dialect. We speak different dialect, and we were born in different districts. And another one is colors. Yeah, although some same colors, but yeah, variety of colors we like. Yeah, favorite colors. Yes. So that's about our group.
Thank you for sharing. Okay, so for the commonalities, we probably have a lot of commonalities in the whole group, right, that you discussed? Okay. Okay, we'll come back to that warm-up activity later. Okay. Okay, so we're going to move on to talking a little bit about teaching philosophy. Okay, so teaching philosophy is thinking about why we do what we do, right? Why do we do what we do? Okay, there has to be some basis of understanding. It's either in our learning, our educational background, the training that we've received, or experiential, right? We see what works, and so we continue to do that, right? We see what doesn't work, and so we change our approach. Okay. So when we're thinking about teaching philosophy, this is the theoretical background or the rationale for our practices, right? Okay, so why do we teach the way we teach? So a teaching philosophy is teaching grounded in and supported by theory and experience. So of course, a teaching philosophy can be a long statement, right? We can write out an essay that explains our teaching philosophy, yeah? So a teaching philosophy can be as long as a page or 2, yeah? But here we're going to think about statements. So short statements that explain why we do what we do. Okay. So the structure for the statement here is I believe something, something, because I have read, studied, experienced, whatever, and therefore I do this practice or this approach. Okay, so this is the stem or the frame that you can use for a teaching philosophy, right? So for example, I believe that learning happens socially because I have studied Vygotsky's theory on learning and watched students' understanding develop through conversations with others. Therefore, I have students work together in small groups to learn concepts and teach each other. Okay, so we have the I believe statement, you have the reason or the rationale, and then you have the action, right? Or the practice. Okay. So I want you to think of one statement. Of course, your teaching approach or your teaching philosophy is full of many statements, right? Many beliefs. But let's just think of one that guides your practice. So it can be, I believe something about L2 learning, I believe something about L2 learners, or I believe something about L2 teachers. Okay, you don't have to do all three of those, just choose one. Okay, because why? Because certain research that has informed your practice, because your experience working in a certain type of program, or is it because what you've experienced as a teacher and what you see working with your students? Okay, therefore I do what? What is the practice? Okay. Okay, so try to just write one statement. Okay, you choose L2 learning, L2 learners, or L2 teachers. Okay, once you have your statement written, you're going to share those statements among your group members. So again, you can work with the same group that you already worked with for the warm-up activity. Share your statement and make a comment on the statements that you hear. Okay. Hopefully you've had enough time to share a little bit. Okay. Okay. So we're going to move on to our topic of formative assessment. Okay. So for this topic, we also have smaller objectives, but they're modeled on the overall objectives of the workshop. So expanding understanding related to the content or related to the topic. Compiling a variety of ways to conduct formative assessment, and then considering how to adapt. Okay, so formative assessment, what do you already know about formative assessment? So try to think just by yourself. You don't have to share these ideas. So what is it? What's an example of it? And how is it beneficial to language teaching? Okay, let's just take 2 minutes to write down. Okay, so this is just an opportunity to think about what you already know about the topic before we start talking about it further. Okay, so if you know a lot, that's great. If you know a little, that's also great. Okay, and then we'll add to that. Okay, so defining formative assessment. Formative assessment is a type of assessment that happens during learning, right? As opposed to summative assessment, right? Which happens after learning. Okay. So it helps teachers adjust instruction, or that's one of the primary benefits of it, is that you can shape your instruction based on formative assessment. Okay. It also provides feedback to students. So whenever you do a formative assessment activity or technique, it doesn't have to include feedback. Okay, but using formative assessment in many forms does include feedback. So it's a way of providing feedback to students. And it involves students actively in their learning process. Okay, generally we're quite familiar with summative assessment. Right, so summative assessment is what happens after learning, right? So in this mic is better, but it's nice to move around. So summative assessment is assessment of the learning, right? So have you learned? Have you met the objectives? Have you met the goals? Okay. And formative assessment is assessment as learning and assessment for learning. Okay. So this is happening during the lessons, right? If it's assessment as learning, then the process of providing increasing opportunities for students to use formative assessment to chart their own progress and reflect on their own learning happens. Okay, so students are involved in improving based on the formative assessments that are being used. Assessment for learning is the assessment that's influencing instruction, influencing how you're teaching. Okay, so we could say that formative assessment and summative assessment can both be used for learning, depending on how the summative assessment is being used. Okay, so if it's just determining whether a student moves on to the next level, okay, that's just summative assessment. But if it's being used to re-inform curriculum or instruction, then we could say those periodic summative assessments are also influencing learning. So they become assessments for learning. Okay, so if we look at comprehensive assessment within the classroom, we're really combining both summative assessment and formative assessment. So just because we now know the benefits of formative assessment, it doesn't mean that summative assessment has to go out the window, right? There are still benefits of having summative assessment. So a comprehensive approach to classroom assessment can include both. Okay, so we have formative assessment that can happen in many different ways or in many different increments or time periods within a class. So you can have minute by minute formative assessment. Okay, minute by minute, you're observing the students. You can gauge whether they understand or not, okay, by your questioning, by the discussion. You can have daily formative assessment. So at the end of a lesson, perhaps you use an exit ticket. Okay, the students have to write something based on a prompt that you give, and their answer to that prompt indicates if they understand the lesson, right? The answer to the prompt indicates what kind of language they can use on that topic. Okay, so daily, weekly. So weekly could be homework, journals, writing journals, vocab journals, something that you don't necessarily use on a daily basis, but you come back to on a weekly basis. Okay, or even on a modular basis, right? Every unit, maybe you use journals. And then summative. So summative, again, could be based on a module, or it could be at the end of the semester. But here we're looking at, can they do what we're asking them to do? Have they learned the topics? So it could be a final draft of an essay, or a story. It could be a presentation that they're giving. Okay, so comprehensive is a combination of formative and summative, right? Okay, so now I'm going to ask you to look in your folder. So you should have a handout that has the alphabet on it. You're going to be doing this with a partner, not your whole group. So for you and your partner, you only really need one paper out. Okay, can I use this? So we're looking for this handout. You're doing this with a partner, so you just need 2 people, but 1 paper. Okay, only 1 person needs to write. Okay, everybody has a partner. Okay, so you're either working in a pair or a small group of 3. And you only need 1 handout for this. So 1 person can be writing, the other person can just be sharing ideas, okay? So for this activity, you're going to be listing all of the answers to the question that I give you on the ABC handout, okay? You can have 1 answer per letter. 1 answer per letter, okay? And you're trying to think of an answer for each letter of the alphabet, okay? So it's going to be 26 answers if you can in 60 seconds. I don't know, we'll see. Okay, everybody understands what to do? Okay, would you like the question? Okay, let me get my timer ready. Okay, so 60 seconds. What activities can be used for formative assessment? Begin. You can also question their answers. Is that really formative assessment? Okay, so how many could you come up with? Anybody get 8? 8? Okay. Anybody get more than 8? 9? 9. 10? 10? 11. Anybody get more than 11? How many? $16. I think that's the winner. Yeah, share. Yeah. Do you want to share your list? Yeah?
Okay, so we got for B is brainstorming, C is collaboration, D is discussion, E exit ticket, F feedback, G group discussion, I is ice breaking, J is jigsaw puzzle, K is Kahoot, M is mind map, O is oral presentation, P is peer evaluation, Q is quizzes, R is reflection, S spelling test, T is thumbs up. Thumbs up, thumbs down. Thumbs up, thumbs down. All right, that's it, that's it.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, so thank you for sharing. I'm also going to open up a section in Padlet where you can share some of your favorite formative assessments. Okay, there are several sections, so we have sections for the different topics that we're talking about today. I'll let you scan the QR and then I'll also show you. So you could provide your list of formative assessments if you want, or you could share your favorite and then be a little bit more descriptive about how you use it. So if you've already accessed the site, you can see that I've added one topic under formative assessment already. So what I shared under the formative assessment section is about exit tickets. So providing exit tickets, it's a way of understanding, depending on the prompt that you use, understanding whether they understand the content that you're talking about. But then it's also a really good regular way of providing accuracy feedback. Okay, and then I've attached the accuracy feedback symbols that I use with students as a shorthand for providing metalinguistic accuracy feedback. So I'm not correcting their grammar for them. I'm indicating what kind of errors that they're making, and then they're making the correction. Okay. Okay, so you can share under formative assessment. I'll have different prompts for these different sections. So for differentiated instruction, active breaks. Throughout, if you want to share any photos that you're taking during our session or activities, you can share under the photo section, or any questions that come up. Okay, you can continue to share through Padlet, right? Some different examples of formative assessment. Here are some others, both activities and then tools that can be used. So there's a lot of different programs and tech that can be used in the aid of formative assessment. Okay, a few considerations for teachers when they're, when they're using formative assessment. So first is thinking about, what do you want to assess? Right, so one thing that teachers have to think about is what would they like to assess? So assessment can be, it can be quite broad, or it could be taken down to very specific items. So for example, in exit tickets, are you giving feedback on every single grammatical error that a student makes? Or are you only focusing on, for example, subject-verb agreement or control of verb tenses? Okay. Mm-hmm. Yes, yeah, it depends, right? Yeah. So when we're assessing something, it doesn't necessarily have to be comprehensive. Yeah, it doesn't have to be everything. Okay. So second, can you incorporate feedback when you're using the formative assessment? Would be a second consideration. Okay. Are you just trying to find out what students know, how they're doing? That's okay, right? If you don't have time to provide feedback for that assessment. Every time you do an assessment doesn't mean you have to provide feedback with formative assessment. Okay. But can you incorporate feedback? And then how? Okay, so different ways of providing feedback. We can have self-assessment, right? Students can be involved in assessing themselves. Okay, this is something that can be very helpful for students feeling like they have autonomy or some control or ownership over their own learning, if they're involved in assessing themselves. Yeah, it's also reflective, yeah. Okay, but it needs to be guided. They need to know what they're assessing. So the use of checklists or rubrics is very helpful for self-assessment. Okay, students have to have a clear picture of what they're supposed to be able to do, what is the outcome, and then that outcome needs to be broken down. So it needs to be itemized into things that they can observe or not, okay, through a checklist or through a rubric. Okay, this often takes training for students, right? They don't automatically know how to do this. So it requires classroom time to train, and then it also requires routine practice. So it's not necessarily something that they only do once. It's something that you come back to, right? Maybe every module. Okay, peer feedback. Peer feedback, all of these types of feedback are very broad topics, right? So we could go in depth on any of these for the whole session, okay? But we're kind of doing overviews here. So peer feedback is a way of getting your peers to help use their expertise, right, or their knowledge to provide feedback for others in the classroom. So it can be beneficial both for the student who's giving the feedback, but also for the one who's receiving, right? So if you're receiving feedback, that improves your work. But if you're the one who is providing feedback, you're seeing the models of how other students are doing the work, right? Or it's a way of feeling like you have some expertise within the classroom and you can share that with your peers. Okay. Again, it's helpful to have structures, right? So students, it's difficult if it's just a free-form feedback, but if they have a rubric or a checklist that they can use, yeah. Yeah.
One student will tell the story, the rest will be giving feedback, but based on how we have taught them to tell the story.
Yes, yeah. So yeah, the checklists or the rubrics have to be coming from what you've taught, or they have to be built based on the outcome, right? The outcome that you're using. Okay. So some frameworks for that are wows and wonders, or rubrics and checklists. So the wows and wonders are basically using two different sentence frames, right? So the wow is what's really good about the product, right? I really liked how you did such and such, okay? The wonder is how you could improve, right? So I wonder if this would be better if you change this part. Okay, so you don't have to use that language, but it's just kind of the pro, the con, right? Wow and wonder is a way of framing it. Okay, of course, peer feedback can be complicated. We get into affect, right? And we want to make sure that peers are feeling comfortable with each other, right? And that they're not losing face in front of their peers. Okay, this is a video example of the use of peer feedback, okay? Based on time, what I think I'm going to do is just share this, okay, through Padlet, and then you can see the example. But it shows how using peer feedback needs to be trained, right? So students need to understand how to do it, and also they may need to be informed of the actual benefit, okay? So sometimes you don't really think that maybe you can benefit from a classmate's feedback, right? You think the only person with knowledge in the room is the instructor, right? So students would need some training on understanding that peers can also provide valuable feedback. Okay, so this video is kind of exemplifying that. Okay, I'll share that in Padlet. Okay, and then teacher feedback. So that's most often what we think of with feedback in the classroom is what's coming from the instructor, right? So one of the biggest challenges of instructor or teacher feedback is, of course, time, especially with large classrooms, okay? So we can think about, is the feedback delayed or is it on demand? So if it's delayed, meaning you're collecting everybody's papers and then you're providing feedback at a different time, that's very time consuming, right? But also important. On demand would be during the class activity. So while somebody's using the language, you can provide feedback on the spot. Okay, that doesn't require any extra time. Yeah. Okay, we can also think about comprehensive versus focused feedback. So comprehensive is you're trying to provide feedback on everything versus feedback just on one aspect of production. So like I mentioned earlier, right? Maybe you're just focusing on verb tenses. So your feedback is only about verb tenses. That's all you're paying attention to. Okay, if it's focused feedback, that usually reduces the time a bit when you're providing feedback as an instructor. Okay, different types of written feedback. So we can have direct, indirect, and metalinguistic. So for direct feedback, you're making the correction for the student. Okay, when you're making the correction for the student, there's not a lot of noticing involved, right? You've corrected it, you've done the work for them. Okay, so students aren't really noticing necessarily what the error is unless they're taking the extra step themselves to do that. And oftentimes that doesn't happen. Okay, indirect is just indicating that there is an error. So maybe you circle the word that's incorrect, but you don't give any information about what the error is or what type of error it is. Okay. If you know the student knows the rule and you can just indicate that there's an error there, that could be effective. Okay. Or if you're around to provide the explanation, if they ask or need to ask, then indirect also works. Okay, but a lot of research points to metalinguistic feedback. So metalinguistic feedback is you're identifying the error and you're suggesting what needs to change. Okay, so students can see the error, they notice the error, but then they also have direction for how to make the correction. The way it's done here looks really time-consuming, right? Because you're adding more comments. So you're highlighting to, and then you're writing a sentence. So you're writing what form of the verb follows can. You don't say, I can to cook, right? We don't need the to. You can say, I can cook. Okay. So the question, though, prompts the consideration of the rule that they need to know to produce the accurate utterance. Okay. If we go back to what I shared in Padlet for the exit tickets, those accuracy feedback forms, that's my way of creating a shortcut. So instead of making a comment, right, for each error, if you see a word that's circled, it means the spelling's incorrect. If you see PL, it means it's a problem with singular plural. Okay? If you see tense, it means verb tense. So you're indicating the type of error, right, without making the actual correction. Okay. So this type of feedback has been shown to be very beneficial for learners. Yeah. Okay, and we have the same kind of thing with speaking feedback as well. So you can have recast, direct, and metalinguistic. Okay, the recast is kind of the equivalent to the indirect feedback, right? A recast is when you repeat what the student has said incorrectly, but you repeat it correctly. So you make the correction. A lot of times students don't notice that. Okay? So you think you're providing the feedback, yeah, but they have to pay attention or they have to notice what the error is in order to understand that you've made a correction. Yeah. Yes, so you could highlight the error and then you could ask, how could that be corrected? Okay, so, right. So there you're indicating that an error has happened, right? So there has to be some pointing to the error. Okay, so in this type of recast, there's no pointing to the error, right? The correction is just made. Okay, and a lot of times we do that as instructors, we recast, but it's not necessarily the most effective form of feedback. Okay, so the direct form of feedback in speaking is you identify the error and you correct it, right? So you say, we don't say this, we say that. Okay. And again, the metalinguistic is you're pointing to the grammatical rule. You're pointing to what needs to be understood in order to make the accurate utterance. Okay. So if they have the awareness of the metalinguistics, right, research points to that being most effective feedback. It doesn't mean that the other forms of feedback are not useful, okay? So again, I think a variety of feedback can be helpful. Okay, so that second consideration was, can you incorporate feedback? How can you incorporate feedback, right? Can you use self-assessments, peer assessments, or is it all instructor feedback? Okay, so there's different ways of incorporating feedback. And then what are you giving feedback on, right? It can be very focused or it can be very large or comprehensive. Okay, and then finally for formative assessment, it's how does this influence instruction? So what is the washback in a way on your instruction, right? So you've assessed the students, and then what does this tell you about what you have to focus on more in your instruction? Okay, so students are perhaps following this one concept very clearly, but they're not able to produce in one specific way. So your instruction has to focus on that one specific way in more detail. Okay. So it's providing feedback to students, but then it's also providing feedback to you as an instructor. So the overarching question in formative feedback or formative assessment is, how is the assessment helpful for both teachers and students? Okay, so there should be positive benefits to using formative assessment to your own instruction. It helps you shape what you're going to teach next, but then also for students. Okay, let's go back to your folder. Yes. So how is it being given in the L1? What does that mean? Just explaining what needs to be changed?
Metalinguistic.
Okay. So I can understand doing that with some of the comments that you're making, right? So if you're making some of the comments in the first language, so that you can clearly explain the linguistic rule, maybe, that they're not understanding, that makes sense, yeah. But if you're doing like direct feedback, that's usually in the target language because you're making that correction, right? Yeah. So I don't know if I even understand how that's possible, right? Like the comments could be, yeah, in the L1, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Just check.
Yeah. I think that can be effective for understanding the linguistic rules. Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
This.
Yeah, intimidated to speak in English. They feel like, well, if it's like that, why not just keep quiet?
Yes.
Yeah, that's the thing. So, what is the best way to help this kind of student who have, they don't have a very good English background?
Okay, yes. Feedback, you have to be careful about how students feel about the feedback. Yeah, because it can be very threatening. Okay, so first I would say students have to understand that the classroom is a safe space. You have to make errors to make improvements. So if they have a basic model of language learning, right? So if they understand that you need input, output, feedback, rehearsal, right? Basically, okay? Input, output, feedback, rehearsal. The feedback is to point out the errors that they make on their output, right? Everybody has to make errors in order to make improvements, right? So first you have to establish that safe environment for learning, yeah. But then also maybe it's a matter of where they're making the errors. So it's more intimidating to do that in front of the whole class, right? If you're speaking in front of everybody. But if they're speaking with a partner or in a small group and they make an error, then maybe that's a safer space for corrections. Yeah. So having different groupings, right? Different formats where you're providing the feedback, I think helps with that. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
The formation of the teammates, the need to be selective. Am I right? Like, yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, how you form the groups. Yeah. Yep. Which is getting into our topic for session 2 a little bit, right? With differentiated instruction. Yeah.
Maybe they need, we need to give them more time. Am I right? To maybe the topic itself. I was just thinking. Oh yeah. Try to think the best way on how to help especially students like very weak in terms of speaking. Am I right? To encourage them. Yeah.
Yeah. So thinking about different pairings, right? So if there's somebody who's of a similar level, right? Maybe you're pairing with them so that they're feeling more comfortable speaking at a similar level, right? So if you have same ability or mixed ability pairings, they both have benefits, but for different reasons, right? So same ability pairings can help with the affect, right? But the mixed ability pairings can help with the zone of proximal development, right? So the more advanced other or knower in the classroom, yeah. Okay, you have one more item in your folder here, right, that I've provided. This is an activity tracker. So it looks like this. So when conducting workshops where a lot of different activities are involved, or if you're doing it for teachers where a lot of these activities might be new for them, I find it helpful to have some form where they can reflect on the activities that they've experienced. Okay, so that's the purpose of having this form. So in the form, it has a space for the name of the activity, what was done, what the purpose of the activity was, and then how you could adapt it for your class. Okay, so the example here is the warm-up activity that we did, in common and not. Okay, so we did a warm-up activity, a description of what we did. We discussed with group members similarities and differences. We asked closed and open-ended questions to get answers, okay? And then the purpose. So it could be used in different ways. So it could just be used as an icebreaker to get to know each other. It could be used as a lead-in to a lesson on similarities and differences. It could be used as formative assessment, couldn't it? Yeah. And then how to adapt. Okay, so how could you adapt this to the needs of different learners or in your context? Okay, so you have space on this handout for different activities that you've encountered. It doesn't mean you have to write down every activity that we're doing, but if something strikes your interest where you'd like to use this in a training session, how would you adapt it, right? So some of the different activities that we've done so far are the warm-up, the teaching philosophy, individual think and write time, the ABC game using Padlet, okay? And this is part of our structure related to experience and reflection. Okay, so use that to help kind of reflect, right? Or use the model in your own trainings as you introduce lots of different techniques and activities in your own trainings or workshops. Okay, we're going to be having a break, a short break between our two sessions. So I think like 10 minutes in between sessions. Yeah? Okay, so let's take a break.